it is November 26, 2024. This is our 5 o'clock board study session. We're going to start by indicating who's here. Clark, go ahead.
Clark Nelson.
Karen Winder.
Chris Wynn.
Kim Chandler.
Julie Jackson.
And Nicole, oh, sorry. Superintendent Horsley will be here in just a minute. And
Todd Hubbard.
Nicole McDermott. All right. We have our main agenda item is our transportation topic, which will be a good, robust discussion to have. So we're going to turn the time over to Dr. Gaddy. And are you going to be part of this?
I'll be here for color and commentary, but just wanted to start the introduction out that we were asked to come talk about transportation this evening because there are many nuances in a transportation system that transports 8,000 or 10,000 kids a day. So there's a lot going on. I think a lot of you are familiar with our tiered transportation system where we stack as many routes as possible in 3 tiers, and they're all closely intertwined and related with all the start times that you see, junior high, high school, and the 3 elementaries. And so what we're attempting to do is best fill the driver's schedule as much as possible. Then we have midday runs to GTI, etc. There are always historic things that we deal with, and that's a lot of what we want to talk about today is there's been a lot of questions about what's a route, what's a state eligible reimbursed route, how do things work with middle times, how can we sometimes get low cost routes, how do we deal with special ed changes, how do we deal with routes that exist as prior boards have directed us to run routes. And so that's the conversation tonight. Oftentimes we're going to give you our best thinking on why a route is what it is, but we weren't around 30 years ago when it was implemented, although we tried to reach back on specific routes for those that might have knowledge. So do forgive us if we make some presumptions as we're trying to guide the conversation. And if we know it's a presumption and it's our best thinking, we'll try and inform you that this is our best thinking as to why this exists. So grant us that as we opine upon a historic route, we don't have the exact knowledge, but we have a pretty good idea. So Dr. Gaddy is here to run through the slide deck. I think many of you have probably memorized it. Julie, I know, has been studying it intently because transportation is life. Some people say it's football, i.e. soccer, but no, it's transportation. And then you've also been given a big 3-ring binder. And so on our non-reimbursable routes, these are the details. A map that you can look at more closely as we project, and literal turn-by-turn directions as it relates to some of those routes. So this is the end-all be-all of what drivers look at day in and day out. So Dr. Gaddy, please, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. I also want to just kind of start by saying I want to acknowledge that since I have been the transportation director, we have added a grand total of 0 non-reimbursable routes. We have added a couple of non-reimbursable stops that are allowed, and we'll talk about that exception, the single stop exception. But these are historic. So some of you may have sat on some of those boards that had added some of those things, but they're at least 7 years old because I've been here for 7 years. So we added one temporarily to Matheson from the Little Valley area. And lo and behold, the very end of that neighborhood qualifies. And so we had enough students to reimburse the route. But when we added it, we knew it was temporarily unreimbursable, but then it became reimbursable because of the additional distances they finished to the west. So, all right. Well,
really quick, sorry. Just as a note, board members, if you'll please write your questions down, and then let's wait till the end unless there's a clarification on a certain slide, let's wait for the end to do any real big questions, okay? Thanks.
okay, so we're going to just run through this agenda real quick. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bus passes and then reimbursed route criteria, then talk about some of the, or all of the non-reimbursed routes that we have. We're going to talk about some issues related to SPED funding, and then kind of some ideas of how can we develop some lower cost unfunded routes if we're going to do some of those things and whether or not we can do some of those things. And then just kind of a brief one-slide update on staffing and transportation. So I want you to be able to understand the bus pass system in a way that you can explain it to your constituents. I know that many of you called me with questions or sent me emails as we rolled out a bus pass system at the beginning of this year that was dramatically different for us, but we were the only ones in the valley not doing it. So that was kind of a change for our secondary schools. I want you to understand the mechanisms of route funding. So as your board discussions go forward and you say, hey, what about a bus? And you can say, ooh, remember Dave said this would qualify for funding if we did this. Second, I want you to understand the different costs associated with unfunded routes, because all unfunded routes are not created equal. I want you to be able to identify whether or not a low-cost unfunded route is an option, because you'd say, well, if there's an option, why don't we just always do that? But it's not always an option, even though that is always an option that maybe we want to see if will work. Next, I want you to be able to understand the generally accepted rationale for funding unreimbursed routes. So I'm going to go kind of just a quick tour through this binder and just kind of tell you some things, and you can maybe have in your mind like, oh, so these are kind of some general reasons past boards have decided to provide busing when it didn't qualify by distance. And then lastly, I want to just be able to tell you about our staffing levels in the Granite School District. So let's roll out, kind of talk about the bus pass system that we used. So in high school, we had kind of this really overcrowding issue. So think of a line running down the middle of the street, and one side of the street qualifies for busing and the other side doesn't. And that literally happens in every single boundary, right? Every single high school boundary. Because every single high school has busing because the boundaries are so large. Well, if I'm the kiddo that's across the street, what do you think I do? Grab my backpack and I jump on that bus. Well, what we have been doing previously is this really bloody extraction method once they thought that they were riding the bus and that they were entitled to ride a bus, where we'd have to print out lists and we didn't have, kids would not have IDs and that kind of thing. And then we'd have to go in and say, Todd Hauber, is Todd Hauber here on the bus? And Todd, maybe knowing that he was ineligible, would be like, so it was really bloody, really awful, and it took a long time. And it was a PR nightmare. And it was just a very reactive system. So and remember, we only receive funding from the state for busing distance eligible kids, because what we would get a lot of times from the public and even sometimes a board member is, well, I mean, if you have that many kids, just put another bus in there. But we don't get the funding for that bus or operating that route, right? So we've always tried to be very, very conservative with our resources. Junior high, we had kind of a different reason that we implemented them. In high schools, in junior highs, we also have a little bit of an overcrowding problem here and there, but because the boundaries are typically smaller, it's not really as big of a problem. Every once in a while, we would have an overcrowded junior high bus, but not as often as we did at Cypress and Cottonwood and Granger and Hunter. So, but behavior management, if anybody here has ever been like a Weeblo leader, I don't know if that's even a thing anymore, but I was a Weeblo leader. Think of having 70 Weeblos on one bus for 20 minutes, right? So the behavior issues were rough. Well, the problem was we had no way to identify who the kids were that were misbehaving. So if Kim got in trouble on my bus, I would try to go ask somebody who it was with this camera footage, and sometimes the school would know Kim and sometimes they wouldn't. And then if Kim knew, ooh, they're after me, she would just jump on another bus and ride to school until she kind of caused a problem there, and she'd bounce around. And so these behavior problems were just kind of mushrooming. And so we thought, you know what? If the kid has an ID, we can print a list of the pictures of kids who have an ID now, and now the driver can go, it was Kim, right? And so it's a very short arc to identifying the problem, right? And we fix it, we do behavior management intervention, kind of a PBIS system, and so we handle that. And again, we had a few of those. So in elementary, you know what? We don't have overcrowded buses, and we don't have behavior problems because there are those cute little elementary kids. And so we just said, we do not need to do this in our elementaries. And we kind of thought, probably trying to have this kindergarten keep track of that bus pass might be a challenge. So we did not go down that road, and we still are not regretting that we didn't go down that road with elementary kids. It's working swimmingly. So the process is that we printed all of the eligible bus passes for the students kind of close to the start of the school year. You all are part of the Granite School District, and so you would understand we have a pretty high transiency rate, right? So if we printed these bus passes in June, by the time we deliver them to the school in August, some of these high schools might be 400 kids different. So we wait until right before school starts, we printed them, and then we made a mistake. We mailed them home, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But now, and then we communicated, hey, if you don't have a bus pass, you can't ride the bus, right? And so many kids who didn't have a bus pass didn't ride the bus, but we did say, but listen, we know we'll probably have some extra seats. So Ben, if you're want to ride the bus, go to your school, fill out this application, turn it into the front office. After 2 weeks of school, we'll take a seat count. Then we'll draw out the number of open seats on each bus like a lottery and award those, and off we go. We also do that 2 weeks into the second semester, just because somebody gets a car for Christmas or turns 16 and gets a drive, so we might have 4 or 5 seats pop up on a bus, and we want to make sure that we're maximizing ridership. So the lessons that we learned, I don't think that anybody checks the actual U.S. postal mail ever, never, ever anymore. And so we found a staggering number of need for schools to reprint ID badges at the school, to the extent that they ran out of all of the extra supplies that they were given and had to order more, and it takes a couple of weeks to get it. And so it just created kind of a logjam. Going forward, Dave Gaddy or whomever is the transportation director will go the week before school starts and deliver a box of cards to each school. And then as a high school administrator, I know this. We would have our SBOs giving out student IDs in the lunchroom for the first 2 or 3 days, and then we'll give a 2 or 3 day grace period for every kiddo to get their ID, and we think that that will cut down on about 95% of the headaches we experienced, as well as schools will know to order more supplies. So that's just kind of a rundown on bus passes. Now, let's talk about what you really want to hear about. Let's talk about state reimbursable routes or requirements to reimburse a district for a bus route. So in secondary, the definition is any student who lives 2.0 miles or greater from the point where their driveway meets the street to the shortest walking route available where they can first step on school property. So a lot of parents will say, this line's wrong. Your line's off. And I'll say, oh, interesting. Tell me your address. And they'll tell me the address. And we have really fancy schmancy GIS stuff that will map the route. And I'll say, well, the problem is you're doing what most rational people would do, which is going to the front door. But there is actually an entrance to the campus on the west back playground, and that's where your child can first step on school property. And so we have to kind of explain, and remember that is state code, that's not our rule. Elementary is the same rule, except for it's 1.5 miles or more, you get a bus. So there's a half a mile difference. And then in order to get a funding for a regular ed run, you have to have at least 10 eligible students on the bus. So that kind of creates a problem when you go, well, there's this little teeny freckle of an area that qualifies, and we go, ooh, we're going to stick a bus in there, because the state makes us turn in the GIS data that shows that there's 10 kids that lives in that little freckle. Does that make sense? So even if there's one kid, we're going to have to put a bus through there because there's one kid, but it will be unfunded, but we'll be required to. So that's kind of one of those weird ones where we go, we have to, but we don't get money for it. So sped route funding is really interesting. 5 students who walk on a bus that are special education designation. 1 wheelchair and 1 walk-on, or 2 wheelchairs is what qualifies a bus for special education reimbursement, right? And we'll talk about later kind of some of the implications of maybe spreading special education units out kind of eliminates most of the funding for most of the buses. If you take 2 special ed units in one school and you put 1 in one school and 1 in the other, probably you're going to have some unfunded buses pop out of the bottom of that, because we would load up 2 buses or 1 bus, where now have 2 half-empty buses, or, 2 buses with 2 kids on it, or 4 kids. So courtesy riders. A courtesy rider is any student allowed to ride the bus who does not meet the distance eligible requirement by the state. So anybody that we do a lottery permit or any other reason that we allow them to ride the bus, they're what's called courtesy riders. And then let's talk about the courtesy stop allowance. So the state allows 1 stop directly on the path to school for any regular education route or sped route in a non-qualifying area to pick up kids. So think of if I'm on 5600 West, clear down north by the McDonald's on 35th South. North of that, a ways down, there's some eligible stops, right? If we're going straight up 5600 West to Hunter High School and we stop halfway up the hill on 5600 West where I was raised, we could pick up kids there and take them into Hunter. Does that make sense? But it has to be directly on the path. You can't go jogging through a neighborhood and find them and then bring them out. They've got to kind of walk out to the direct path. So, and then if you add more than that, they start deducting the miles and minutes for every ineligible stop that you're putting on there, right? So let's talk about non-reimbursed routes. So first thing I want to just dispel right up front. The state has 0 mechanism for reimbursing what people refer to as hazard routes. They do not exist. They're either funded and eligible or they're unfunded and ineligible. They never say, a kid's got to cross this or there's a railroad track. They don't say that. They have eligible routes by distance and ineligible routes. That's it. The state does not reimburse school of choice designations. So you're talking about your ALC programs, your DLI programs, anything where a student is opting in, special permitting, going to a special program outside of their home boundary, they're not entitled to state reimbursed transportation. IB, DLI, gifted, or ALC. Students can be assigned to only 1 school boundary. So like in the case of the 3100 SAS study that you all are looking at, there was an idea of, well, can't you make the boundary for the DLI magnet school encompass the Monroe boundary and the Hillside boundary and still keep Hillside and Monroe to have their own boundary? And the answer is no. One is a school of choice designation with no boundary, and the other 2 have boundaries. Does that kind of make sense? And then last, they make us submit our maps for state reimbursement. So they want to be able to look at our GIS maps and say, yes, they've got stops in the eligible areas, and they kind of audit those things, and we've always done really well on our audit because we just turn in what it is. So schools of choice designated routes. Here's the ones that we have, and these are in your binder. Fox Hills has 2 buses that go all over the place picking up kids to go to Fox Hills. Morningside, same thing. West Kearns has 1 bus that picks up DLI students, and Ms. Sorensen made a little correction to me on this slide. She said, make sure that you relay that this is not an actual DLI school, it's an ALC school with DLI chosen as their method of instruction. I've got a doctoral degree and I was lost, but I'm sharing that with you. I have no idea what that means. I think it means that there is an entrance exam to get into that school.
Historically, the West Kearns DLI program was classified as an advanced placement, mainly because back in the day there were a lot of native Spanish speakers, and so that they knew that the hurdle would be higher for those kiddos, it would be easier for them to get in, so they did have a testing option. And that puts it in the dual mode DLI ALC type category. It's not operationally relevant, but understand it has 2 designations, and that has gone back, I think, about 15, maybe 18 years ago.
And so, just so you know, when she gave me that piece of information, I was like, what the heck, did I make that up? Did I make up the name of this? And I looked back on stop sheets all the way back 10 years before I was the director of transportation that called it DLI. So, but just to be clear, yeah, Karen?
Yeah, West Kearns is my school. So basically, in talking to the principal, because I was a little confused on this just operationally, and so like their beginning DLI course, they take the 15 non-English, the top 15 non-English speaking students and the top 15 English, the ones that test out of kindergarten, and then that makes their cohort that they go through. So it is a test in DLI program now.
I just wanted to clarify that So maybe I've got it called DLI on this slide, and maybe it's ALC. Either way, it's a school of choice designation for the kiddos that we're going to pick up in the bus. And then West Valley has a couple of buses. They have an ALC program, and Woodstock Elementary. So over time, we had somehow come under the understanding that ALC, because it is a test-in procedure, there was an understanding that that qualified it as almost like a special placement. And so the state came back very clearly and clarified that is not true. And so we calculated the cost, and we compared it to what the state calculated the cost. And to run those ALC DLI routes is about $306,000. There's about 5 schools that are served in that effort, and about 400 students that we move to go to those schools. So now let's talk about some prior board-directed unfunded routes. Yes, Todd, go back.
I think I just want to underscore your description there. So the state clarified the definition for us, which meant we were receiving money for them prior, but starting now,
Yes, correct.
we will not be receiving. So this is a budget impact right now.
This is budget impact this fiscal year, the $306,000.
You're just talking about ALC.
Yes, correct. Yep, that is correct. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that. All right, so let's talk about middle elementary school unfunded routes. So here's Arcadia, and you can see that 5400 South is that yellow line that I so straightly drew on there. And we clearly don't want kindergartners running across 5400 South east of Bangerter, right? Like I think we will all agree that that's a little, or at least prior boards have said that. So that's the rationale that I would provide, that they probably used to determine that to be an unfunded route that we would provide. Cottonwood Elementary, it's a little bit more of a question mark. As I looked, there are sidewalks all the way from that ineligible area up at the top there that we're riding all the way down to the school. I have been told that in one lifetime, there were not sidewalks there. I can't verify that. I don't know how that knowledge for myself, but I have been told that. So on the Holiday Boulevard right there.
There aren't sidewalks on Holiday Boulevard. Like from one spot until the school there is, but not from where all the kids are to the school.
So when I Google mapped it, I did the little thing where you pick up the little guy and drop him in. And from where that traffic light is at Cottonwood Lane, all the way down to the school, there are sidewalks. As I just,
Oh, you're talking about it different. Oh, no, you're talking about from where that arrow is down.
let me just show you on this.
Sorry that I'm.
That's okay. Right here where Cottonwood Lane connects.
Yeah.
And that's the area, it's that way of Cottonwood Lane for busing. There's a light and a crosswalk there, and then there's sidewalks all the way down to the school.
Oh, so you're talking about the bus up there?
Yes, yeah,
No, I
that's
thought you were talking about the bus down here.
No, just that.
Okay.
So,
There are sidewalks, I agree.
So I didn't, this might be my ignorance, this is why I'm asking. I didn't think sidewalks were a requirement because there's several places where that I have seen that.
President McDermott, you would be correct. Those are not a requirement, but I'm only trying to give my best guess of why a prior board would have said, fund that. Yeah, yes, they are not. In fact, the state is very clear. If there is a problem with a safe walking route, that is for the municipality to fix, whether through a crossing guard, a hawk-eyed flash crossing, if they need sidewalks, if they have potholes, if they have speeders, run up and down the street, get the police out there and get that speeding stopped. So the state's very clear in their guidance.
Yeah, the state guidance really directs us to not solve operational or infrastructure deficient areas with a bus bridge.
So Crestview, this is Highland Drive. You would cross Highland Drive to get to Crestview on this unfunded route. Gorley, you have, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Gorley area. I kind of grew up over there. And 40th West and 47th South, there's actually where the kind of the two yellow lines cross, there's this crazy like continuous flow turn right there that even as a kid, I think I'm aware of a student, maybe not a student, but a child who was hit with it, because it's like a freeway on-ramp, really. It doesn't stop. And so my best guess is they didn't want kids crossing that. I can't be quoted on that, but I just, as I looked at it, I was like, yeah, that's EO's Billiards. I know exactly where that's at, and that's problematic. So, and Karen, it was probably problematic when you were a young kid. So, Lake Ridge Elementary. These kiddos are crossing Parkway and 3100 South. Those are low speed limit, low width crossings, have crosswalks, but that's the only two things I could see that would say that you would think would give you a bus. Moss, if there is any one that I would say if Dave Gaddy had to weigh in and say which one of these are worthy, kindergartners crossing 900 East, 4500 South, and 700 East probably is a little bit scary. But I put them on there because those are the big roads, and I figured that's probably what it is. By the way, if you look at that blue square right in front of Moss, that's not the bus that goes to Moss. That's actually a stop for Woodstock's ALC program. All right, Redwood Road. We have kiddos, there's 3100 South and there's Redwood Road. They would be walking on a sidewalk on Redwood Road, but there is a crossing at 3100 South. There is a traffic light there. There's a crossing guard there. So I'm not sure, but that's the only thing I could see that I'd go, well, that's probably why. Smith Elementary. Route number 2 that Dave Gaddy says, yes, please. 6200 South and Redwood Road is even far more scarier now than it has ever been because they've lengthened that freeway collector, and you would have kids literally crossing a freeway collector. And so that's kind of scary. We do it with the elementary and the junior high kids. The high school kids, I can't remember. I don't think we do. Well, we don't do any unfunded high school runs. Yeah, yep. So that's Smith. Now let's talk about the middle time highlights. So we just saw that we served 8 schools, about 500 kids, for a grand total of about $10,500 a year, right? So cost-wise, man, that middle route is awesome, right? Super cheap. And we're going to explain why that is in a few slides. By the way, Karen, you had a question from the board meeting, so I put a slide in here. You said, is there a way to find buses during the middle time for students attending Stansbury from potentially former Redwood boundary? We are recombining route pairings, and we can commit to having buses to do so at the board's direction. So we can commit to having them.
No, thank you for doing that, because that 10,000 number, I mean, you're moving a lot of kids in that middle route.
Yeah.
So thanks for putting that in.
I just took notes at the last board meeting.
No,
I was like, ooh, Dave's kind of on the hot
That's great, and
seat.
I'm
I
glad
better
it
take some
doesn't come
notes
with a huge price tag. That
Yeah.
really was can we put this in without?
I think it's about $1,500 a year for that, just as a rough amount, because it might be 3 buses of kids, right? I'll let you guys decide whether or not that fits in the budget. I'll just keep going on the slideshow. Late elementary school unfunded routes. Oakwood. You have Highland Drive and Big Cottonwood Canyon Road. Highland Drive's pretty scary. I will give them that. I know that Big Cottonwood Canyon Road, the one that we get a lot is we don't have sidewalks. And I guess it kind of forces you out into the road. So there's that. Taylorsville Elementary, you have kiddos that are crossing over I-215 on a bridge, and then you're crossing 2200 West, Redwood Road, and 4100 South on the other side. So there's lots of interesting crossings to get there. And so we get those kiddos to Taylorsville on a bus. Upland Terrace, you have Evergreen Avenue, which probably isn't on the nation's top list of scariest roads, but I will tell you what is, except for there has been an infrastructure upgrade, I believe, is that S-curve right there. So that S-curve, we've actually had buses bang the side of the S-curve because it's so sharp and so steep. But now it looks like, as I drop in my little Google guy, that they've constructed a sidewalk that kind of comes back off of the S-curve so the kids aren't right on the S-curve. So Again, prior board, I don't think that that used to exist. I can't speak to that being 100% true, but, okay. Yes. Wilson. Wilson is a State Street issue. We had a bus collide with a car that State Risk Management clocked by video on a storefront doing 95 miles an hour on State Street. Sounds a little fast to me, and it's a really, really wide road. So again, that's State Street. That's my best thinking there. At one point, my understanding is there was kind of something that we were kind of, I don't know if loosely promised is the way to put it, a ped bridge that went over State Street that never materialized, so.
Yeah, that was part of an environmental study for the expansion of I-80 and specifically as it connected to I-15. The end selection was not to undertake that improvement, and therefore any consideration for a pedestrian bridge did disappear as the environmental study said, hey, we can't find a way to make the weave pattern and transition from I-15 onto I-80 and through State Street effective, and so that disappeared.
Obviously, that's right here in front of the district office. You do know they've got crossing guards there. I see them. They got a big hawk-eyed crosswalk. And they even have a traffic light controlled crosswalk, but again, it's a really wide road, and I'm just guessing that that's the speed and the width. So now I want you to compare what I just told you about the middle school start times with this. This cost is about $124,500 a year for only 4 schools served and only about 259 students moved. Right, so you can see there's a big difference in if you add them to the late time versus the versus the middle time. By the way, we don't do almost any transportation during that early elementary start time. Those are like all walking neighborhoods for the most part, all but I think one, and that is because we can't get from our junior high to pick up those kids into the school by the time they need to be there for school. Junior high unfunded runs, yes. Yeah, Wilson, Upland, Taylorsville, and Oakwood. Junior high unfunded routes. There's Benyon, and we've already talked about said Crazy Collector and Redwood Road and 6200 South. And then on the other side, on the west side of the Benyon boundary, they awesomely took down a ped bridge and didn't put it back up. So if you want to walk to Benyon from that neighborhood kind of behind that Reams, do you guys know Dixie Drive, all that stuff? You have to walk through an on and an off ramp continuous flow intersection to Bangor. And so that was something that was put in place during the kind of that construction that we were asked to maintain after it went away. I think that those collector ramps are a little on the side, but.
The history on the Bangor improvement, as they analyzed what it would take to get a bridge, so the intersection raised up, and they couldn't figure out a meaningful way to get the walking bridge any higher. It started to conflict with other infrastructure needs, and so therefore the SPUI, it's an urban interchange, has those continuous flow on and off ramps. They couldn't solve it. UDOT believed they could not solve it from a technical perspective with a walking route, and that's why we still have maintained that particular bus route. That's the history behind that one. That one we were here for.
And then our only other junior high is Wasatch Junior High. These kiddos would cross 3300 South by that McDonald's where there's a light and a crossing guard and go right into their neighborhood. But we have provided that. It's a historical one. I don't know what drives it. That's all I can see is the 33rd South. Obviously, Evergreen and the S-curve come in if you walk down there. But again, as we've described, that S-curve has new infrastructure. But we do that one. Junior high routes, we serve 2 schools for about $54,000, and we move about 127 students. So let's talk about some special education issues. So again, 5 riders that are walk-on, 1 walk-on, 1 wheelchair, or 2 wheelchairs to qualify for funding. So recently, Changes including all-day kindergarten and disbursement of SPED programs into more school locations have resulted in fewer routes qualifying for state funding. So again, we're to that issue where we've said in some, for example, of our junior highs, hey, we don't want 2 units at this school. We want 1 unit at this school and 1 unit at this school, share the love. Well, we end up with 2 unfunded buses when we do that. And again, that's just a consideration, right? Like, busing isn't the beginning and the end of the world, but it's just a budget consideration. And then all-day kindergarten. So the only preschool students that we transport are special education preschool students. We don't have courtesy riders. We don't. If you sign up for a preschool, it's your job to get them there. But if through Child Find, we find that you qualify for special education, and by we, I mean District Special Education Child Find, then you're assigned to a special preschool. And again, there's only a few of those scattered around the district. But we would always pair a special preschool program with a special kindergarten program, and here's why. That noon time, we call it the noon run time, when either the AM kids are getting out or the PM kids are going in, you would have between a SPED kindergarten and a SPED preschool a bus that qualifies for reimbursement. Virtually all of our preschool buses are now not qualifying. Because, let me rephrase that, the noon run part of our kindergarten buses are not qualifying because we've got 3 SPED preschool kids on a bus, and it just doesn't count. And so we're trying to figure out if there's a solution to that where we can make more qualify. The hardship is that the boundaries are so big and you're literally stopping at every home. So it's not like a regular ed stop where you pull up and 20 kids pile on and you drive off. This is pull up, wait, and a lot of these kids are super challenged, right? So it takes a long time sometimes to come out to the bus, and so it doesn't go real fast.
So Dave, do we not get reimbursed for preschool?
Not unless there's 5 walk-ons.
Oh, okay.
1 wheelchair and a walk. Yes, it's all the SPED is the same.
Because traditional preschool, there's no funding for buses for preschoolers.
Correct. That's correct.
But for SPED preschoolers, there is.
That's correct.
Okay.
And remember, if we have a SPED preschool in a school that has maybe some other units, some AA or EE units in their school, well, we can pick those preschool kiddos up on the way into school with the same bus, so their en route would be funded, but their ride home wouldn't be, because those AA and EE kids that are 1st through 6th grade, or 1st through 5th grade now, going forward, they would still be staying at school while we're taking home just the preschool kids, if that makes sense. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So we're kind of looking at maybe some contract reduction due to that we'll do through attrition to kind of suck back some of that time, at least so we don't have to pay it as much. But it's always a challenge when we start reducing 8-hour routes, and we'll talk about that in staffing at the end. So let's talk about so we've talked about some low-cost routes, right? We say, hey, those are the middle time, those are low cost. Well, we can do some, but there are some first of all, they're finite. So we can't just keep going, well, middle run it, because we'll run out, right? And I wouldn't say we're out, but we're pretty close to out now. So A, you got to understand it's finite, and B, the total run has to be about 10 to 12 minutes long, right? So it has to meet a condition where a driver is coming from a junior high, basically directly on their path to start picking up for their late elementary, and they go, bang, stop, kids get on, bang, stop, kids get on, bang, stop, kids get off, and they go straight to their other. So these are just quick bangers, just ding, 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 done, right? So it's it has to meet that real tight parameter, 10-ish to 12-ish minutes in length, and it has to be a driver that's close with a gap in their route. Because you might say, well, there's this junior high driver over here at Wasatch, and he's got a gap in his route. Why can't he do the Redwood run? Well, because they can't drive all the way across the valley and get there in 12 minutes and get back. Does that make sense? So it really just has to be perfect. Now, like I say, we're repairing all of our route pairings because of the massive number of transportation changes this coming year for all of the changes that may happen that you may approve combined with the ones that you did approve last year. So that gives us a chance to kind of reorder the whole board. That kind of lets us go, let's make a spot for a middle run right here because we know we want one, right? And then late routes are usually sped routes. So most schools that start at the late time are either ALC or sped routes. They have to be because the routes are so long. So we drop off at a junior high, 7:40-ish. These schools start at 9:05. They generally want them there about 8:45 for breakfast. So you have just under an hour by the time you get the kids out of your bus, do your child check, to start going around and picking up like 10 or 12 different kids at their individual homes, right? So the routes are longer. So why is the middle cheaper? I want you to understand that driver that runs the middle route is already under contract. They're merely staging for about 10 minutes. So we go, well, we can use you to do some work for us for 10 minutes, and you're being paid anyway to stage or to go run it, right? So when it works and we can make it work, all we're paying for is the fuel, right? So that's why you see a run sometimes costs as little as $500 for a whole year, especially like these cute little redwood ones. If we bring them from Westlake, somewhere real close, Granite Park, that can just go bang, 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 and dump them off, we're okay, right? So the driver's already on the clock. That's the big difference, is the driver. So let's talk about expensive unfunded runs. Why are they expensive? Well, they're big, right? So we're driving a whole lot more miles. That equals more fuel. They're at the end of the run, so we're actually paying the driver's time for that run. If it weren't for that run, that driver would be off, and we would pay about an hour less in the morning and an hour less in the afternoon. So it's about 2 hours more pay per run per driver for an entire year. Our average pay for drivers, I think now, is about $28 an hour. You times out that math, it gets up there really fast. And then any late elementary run, high school run, or junior high run that's different than what will fit in our times, or that we don't have a bus for, but we're trying to make another route, that means we're probably going to be really expensive, because we're probably not just going to have to pay a driver, but we're probably going to have to buy another bus. Right now at transportation, we use every single parking spot for buses. So if we start adding to the fleet, we're going to have to come up with a way to either expand the transportation base through a capital project, or look at some really interesting ways that maybe we can rent some spaces from a trucking Old Dominion that's next to us or something. I don't know what that answer is, but it's expensive, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. I wanted to just give you some things that I think probably prior boards have thought about when they kind of did some unfunded runs. Number one, age of kids, right? I think we would all agree that probably kindergartners are going to have a whole heck of a lot harder of a time navigating challenges than maybe a senior in high school or a sophomore in high school. Roads crossed. Width of the road, speed limit, right? All roads aren't created equal. Your little neighborhood road's not the same as 7th East or State Street. Crossing aids. Man, you go on 6200 South and you are going to, I'm trying to remember the elementary right off the top of my head, but you're going up that hill and there's that giant Hawkeye, the intersection or crossing thing that you can see from a mile in both directions. If they've got those kind of infrastructure, it's generally believed to be a little bit safer. Painted crosswalks, signalized intersections, sidewalks on main roads, right? I know that we get a little bit of heartburn when we're walking on, say, Bacchus Highway without a sidewalk, or on, you know, a big road like that doesn't have a sidewalk. It's critical, again, that we do not patch the shortcomings of municipalities with transportation. They must fix issues with their pedestrian access. So environmental issues, IC sidewalks, road maintenance, safe waiting areas, that kind of thing. It's kind of up to them, if there's no street lights, to put a street light up so that you can have a lit bus stop and that kind of thing. So, so my last slide, and then I'll get to whatever questions you have. Staffing at transportation. So prior to COVID, we staffed about 60 hourly bus drivers. And so these are people that are not on contract. Generally, they're retired bus drivers that say, hey, when you're driving all these field trips to the zoo in the spring, I'd love to come and go to the zoo with the kids. And they're mercenaries. We pay them, they do that trip, and they go home, right? Like and I always explain the difference between dating and marriage. We're just dating those folks. We can ask them, they can say no. They can ask us, we can say no. We're not married to them, right? Our contract drivers, that's the daily route drivers that come in every day, and there's an expectation and a mutual understanding they'll be there every day. After COVID happened, because again, the general number of these folks are elderly or getting elderly because they're retired bus drivers, they were convinced and scared of COVID, rightfully, like all of us were at some point for some period of time. And so we were down to about 5 non-contract drivers left that we had on our rolls, and only 2 of them would answer our call. So, and we were always about 6 to 8 contract drivers short. So my office staff, including myself, dispatchers, supervisors, we were literally daily route bus drivers for about 2 years. And then the board approved a $4 an hour raise, and we are now hosting a radio station contest at Transportation of everybody with a CDL and school bus endorsement wanting to work for us. We are the only fully staffed transportation department in Utah. And it is all thanks to your willingness to incentivize folks to come and drive for us. And it's just made the operation. So now, and we're slowly building back up those non-contract drivers so that we can go to the zoo more and do field trips more. And so we're in a really good spot staffing wise. So I just wanted to share with you our appreciation for that. So what questions do you have?
So can I suggest that we keep it to maybe the top 2 or 3 questions that you have? If you have a whole list, that maybe this is a conversation to further take with Dr. Gaddy.
Yeah, you're always welcome to come out to Transportation. Hang out.
So Connie, you want to start?
Yeah, I just.
Is your mic on?
Okay. My question is, when you were talking about funding, that it's from the property, the house property, but I wanted to mention that it's the property of the apartment complex too, because we have this huge apartment complex. The kids probably have to walk a quarter mile to even get to that bus stop, and we can't qualify because
That's
it
right.
goes from that property to the.
It's a true statement whenever there's private roadways involved, and often it's apartment complexes. Sometimes it's a condo project, sometimes it's
A private lane.
gated community of some sort. And so the private roadway, as it meets public, is a measuring spot. And also, from a practicality standpoint, some of our apartment complexes with their covered parking and their tight turns are not friendly to a 40-foot yellow school bus. And even if you wanted to go in many of them, you're not going to be able to circulate. And as we all know, members of our public always park in the appropriate designated spaces and never park where they're not supposed to. So it gets even more convoluted taking the bus into a private lane or private driveway situations.
But Connie, are you making the point that in order to qualify for a bus, it's not from the apartment, it's from the edge of the apartment complex?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Basically, where the private roadway access meets public, in those cases, that has to meet the 1.5 mile or 2 mile mark respectively.